priests working together. And we took as our patrons the ecclesial team of Paul, Prisca and Aquila. Second couple to be mentioned is Andronicus and Eunia. And here's what Paul says. Greet Andronicus and Eunia, my compatriots and my fellow prisoners. They are outstanding among the apostles, and they were in Christ before me. So they're Jewish in origin, and they've suffered imprisonment at some time for their faith. But what an extraordinary thing to say. They are outstanding among the apostles, which means not that they belong to the 12, of course, but rather that in some way they had seen the Lord, and that the Lord had commissioned them to go out and preach the gospel and to found churches. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 we read this. Jesus appeared first to Cephas and secondly to the 12. Next he appeared to more than 500 of the brethren at the same time. I wonder for this Jewish couple whether they were not among the 500 that saw the Lord and felt the Lord's call to go and preach the gospel. They are now a very venerable couple, and they have extraordinary status within the community of Rome. Brendan Byrne even suggests that they may have been foundation members of the church in Rome itself. Among this extraordinary list, we can discern a number of other households besides those of Prisca and Aquila and Andronicus and Eunia. For example, Aristobulus' house, Narcissus' house, and also probably two further households in verses 14 and 15. For example, in verse 15 we read this. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus and his sister, and Olympus, and all the saints who are with them. Who are with them in the house church there, we think. None of these house churches, the Latin is Domus Ecclesiae, house of church, the Domus Ecclesiae. None of these house churches have survived. Indeed, we don't have any of these house churches from the first 2 centuries. But we do have a number of house churches from the 3rd century. A century before Christianity was legalized and we were entitled to buy and own property. The one that you must visit when you go to Rome is the present Basilica of Saints Giovanni e Paolo, John and Paul. You can go right down beneath the level of the church into the 3rd century church, part of which had been obviously transformed into a place where Mass could be celebrated for more than 100 people. One of the house churches we're privileged to visit in Rome. A final word about Rufus in verse 13. Greet Rufus, the chosen one in the Lord, also his mother and mine. Well, you know, some people say this could be the Rufus mentioned in Mark, chapter 15, verse 21. They enlisted a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry the cross. Rufus could be son of Simon of Cyrene. Now, after all these greetings, and they go for so much of this chapter, we come across an abrupt change in tone. Paul now offers a stern warning to the Romans against those who create divisions and create difficulties. Verse 17. It's quite a strange thing to see, and the tone is a bit different. And some people would say this clearly is an interpolation, something added here into the text, because it does seem to break the text in some way. And then this is followed by a series of brief greetings, verses 21 to 24, and a few comments are in order. Timothy, he's the most frequently mentioned of Paul's co-workers, Timothy. And of course a couple of letters are attributed to him. Jason and Sosipater, they're possibly, or Jason is possibly the one who gave Paul hospitality in Thessalonica, and Sosipater is possibly the delegate called Sopater from Berea. Small points, but just possible connections there. Tertius is the scribe, the one who wrote it down, the letter down. Gaius from Corinth, where Paul is living, and Erastus. Erastus is a treasurer, it says, so somebody significant in the civil community. Gaius, Erastus and Quartus are probably key people within the church of Corinth. And then Paul concludes the whole letter with a beautiful doxology. And now I'd just like to spend a few moments for some final comments about this beautiful letter that we've been privileged to work through together and to study and to pray from, Paul's letter to the Romans. Bishop Tom Wright, in his very popular and terrific sort of introduction to the letter, uses a lovely analogy to speak of the flow of Paul's letter. He says it's a kind of symphony in 4 major movements. And these 4 movements are, the first 4 chapters, a somber picture of the slavery that all human beings are trapped in because of the realm of sin and death which is overcoming them. The second movement is a rather glorious movement because chapters 5 to 8 give us a vision of the liberty enjoyed by the children of God after their baptism, and what a wonderful thing to live in the Spirit. What a wonderful thing it is to live in the Spirit. Then the third movement, chapters 9 to 11, are a revealing movement of God's stunning plan for the salvation of all humankind, Jews and Gentiles alike. And the final movement, the fourth movement, softer, more practical, chapters 10 to 15, a beautiful invitation to live the Christian life in the community where we find ourselves. And he says that these 4 movements are stitched together by a constantly reoccurring melody, and that is the gospel, the melody of the gospel, the good news, which is Jesus, Son of David, Son of God, now Lord of all. It's a rather lovely thing to say about this letter. The second thing I'd like to say, the letter does focus our attention really on the heart of the gospel as Paul preaches it and lives it. His starting point is an experience of sinfulness, of being lost. And he says we can only escape that through faith in Jesus. Faith in Jesus is ultimately accepting that he died for us and he rose again. And we welcome him into our life. Through faith in Jesus, through our baptism into the death and resurrection of Jesus, we then move from the slavery of sin into the promised land